His wife left him for her lover, called him a failure in his own kitchen, and walked out the door like she was leaving a job she'd been trying to quit for years. She was wrong about everything except one thing. She was definitely leaving. What she didn't know, what her lover didn't know, what her mother who led the applause didn't know, was that the quiet man they dismissed that night was the silent owner of the company that had been funding her new man's entire operation, his cases, his Buckhead address, his white Mercedes, his confidence. Every dollar Terence spent trying to impress her had a trail, and that trail led straight back to the man she called a failure. For 2 years, he said nothing. He watched, he waited, and then, with one standard business letter, no raised voices, no threats, no drama, he pulled the thread that unraveled everything. And on the day it all fell apart, she came back, sat down at the same kitchen table where she'd thrown his mail at his chest, and asked him for a single dollar. What he did next is the reason you clicked on this video. If this is already your kind of story, do us a favor right now. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop your city in the comments. We want to know where in the world you're watching from today. Your support keeps these stories coming every single week. Now let me take you all the way back to where this started. A Thursday evening in October, a kitchen in Atlanta's West End, and an envelope that one woman grabbed out of a mail pile, pressed into her husband's chest, and called junk. He had been on his feet for 9 hours. Darnell Cross worked the early shift at Parkside Elementary, in by 6, out by 3:30, and on most days he made the 20-minute drive back to West End with the radio low and his mind quieter than most people would have believed. He was not a complicated man. He liked the drive. He liked the way the afternoon light hit the old houses on Oglethorpe Avenue when the seasons started turning. He liked coming home. That Thursday in October, he turned on to his block and noticed the lights were on in every room. Keisha never left all the lights on. He parked behind her Accord and sat for a moment with the engine idling, reading nothing into it yet, the way a man does when he has spent years training himself not to expect the worst. Then he saw the suitcases through the front window, 2 of them standing upright near the door, like they'd been waiting for him to notice. He turned off the engine. He went inside. She was in the kitchen. Tamara was there too, leaning against the counter with her arms crossed, the way she always did when she had already decided something and was just waiting for the performance to begin. Keisha had her coat on. Her purse was on her shoulder. She had done her hair. Darnell looked at the bags near the door. He looked at his wife. He said her name. What came next lasted maybe 4 minutes. It felt like being taken apart one bolt at a time. Keisha did not cry. She did not hesitate. She had clearly rehearsed this, or something close to it, and she delivered it with the steady confidence of a woman who had been waiting a long time to finally say the thing out loud. She told him she was done. She told him she had been done for longer than she was willing to admit. She told him that a woman like her, a woman who worked hard, who presented herself well, who came from a family with standards, deserved more than what he had ever been able to give her. She said the word custodian the way some people say it, with a particular flatness like the word itself was evidence. She said he had no ambition. She said he had no vision. She said he moved through life like a man who had already accepted defeat, and she was not going to grow old watching that. Tamara nodded slowly from her position at the counter. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Her presence alone was its own verdict. Darnell stood in the doorway between the living room and the kitchen and said nothing. There was nothing to say that would have changed the next 5 minutes, and some part of him understood that clearly. He watched Keisha's face while she spoke. He noticed that she did not look sad. She looked relieved. That was the part that stayed with him. Then she turned to the mail pile on the kitchen counter. The stack that had been building up since Monday, the one neither of them ever got to fast enough. And she started going through it with the quick, impatient efficiency of a woman tying off loose ends, bills, a grocery circular, something from the city. And then one envelope, cream-coloured, with a return address printed in small, professional font along the upper left corner. She didn't read it. She didn't look at it for more than a half-second. She pressed it hard against Darnell's chest, and he caught it with both hands before it could fall. "More junk mail from some fake company," she said. "I always knew you were nothing." Crossbridge Financial, LLC. Darnell looked down at the envelope. Then he looked up at his wife. She had already turned away. He folded the envelope once and slid it into the front pocket of his work jacket. He wasn't sure why. It wasn't a decision exactly. It was the kind of thing a man does when his hands need somewhere to go and his mouth has run out of words he's willing to spend. Outside, a car horn tapped twice, short and impatient. Through the kitchen window, Darnell could see the white Mercedes sitting at the curb with its engine running, exhaust curling up slow in the October air. The driver was just a silhouette behind tinted glass, patient, waiting, like he had done this before or had always known it would end this way. Keisha picked up her purse. She said something to Tamara that Darnell didn't catch. Then she walked past him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, the good perfume, the one she wore when she wanted to feel like a different version of herself. And she went out the front door without looking back. Tamara followed. She paused in the doorway just long enough to give Darnell a look that was almost pity, but not quite. Then she was gone too. The door closed. Darnell stood in his kitchen for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed. The overhead light buzzed faintly the way it always had, the way he had been meaning to fix for 6 months. Everything was exactly the same as it had been that morning when he left for work, and nothing was the same at all. He went back outside. He got into his truck. He did not start the engine. He sat there with the envelope in his lap and watched the white Mercedes pull away from the curb, signal, and disappear around the corner on Oglethorpe Avenue, taking the silhouette and his wife and the last version of his life all at once. The street went quiet. Darnell looked down at the envelope in his hands. Crossbridge Financial, LLC. He ran his thumb across the seal but did not open it. Not yet. He just sat there in the dark, in the driveway of the house he had paid for, holding something his wife had called junk. But this moment, as cold and hollow as it felt, did not begin tonight. To understand what Darnell Cross was really holding in that envelope, you have to go back further. Back to where the silence started, back to what Keisha married and what she never bothered to see. Darnell Cross had not always been a man who kept things to himself. There was a version of him, younger, lighter, easier to read, who laughed too loud at cookouts and held doors open for strangers, and believed, with the uncomplicated confidence of a man who had not yet been taught otherwise, that being good was enough, that working hard was enough, that showing up every single day without complaint or excuse was the kind of thing a woman noticed and kept close. He met Keisha Pruitt at Greater Harvest Baptist in the spring of 2018. She was standing near the fellowship hall with a paper plate and a posture that said she knew exactly how she looked. She was beautiful in the particular way of women who have been told, so their entire lives and have built their whole personality around managing it carefully. She laughed at something Darnell said that first afternoon. Something small, nothing he could even remember later. And he was gone before the potato salad ran out. They dated for 11 months. They married in June of 2019 in the sanctuary at Greater Harvest, with white ribbons on the pews and Keisha's mother Diane crying in the front row in a hat that cost more than Darnell's first paycheck. The early months were good, genuinely good. Keisha worked billing at Grady Health and came home talking about her day, and Darnell would listen from the kitchen while he finished dinner, and they would eat together at the table by the window, and the evenings would stretch out easy and unhurried. He liked who they were in those hours. He thought she did too. But Keisha had grown up in a specific kind of house. Diane Pruitt ran her home on Cascade Road like a museum of respectability, everything in its place, everything signaling arrival, the right church, the right neighborhood, the right husband. Diane had married a man who wore a tie to work, and she made sure her daughters understood what that meant before they understood much else. Status was not a preference in that household. It was oxygen. Darnell mopped floors for a living. He knew this. He had no shame about it. The work was honest, the hours were consistent, and he was good at being invisible in the way that necessary people often are. But he was learning, slowly, that Keisha had never fully separated from her mother's measuring stick. It followed her into their marriage like a guest who never announced they were staying. Then Raymond Cross died in February of 2020. Uncle Raymond was Darnell's father's older brother, a small, precise man from Macon who had spent 40 years moving quietly through the world and accumulating things no one thought to ask him about. He drove the same Buick for 16 years. He ate lunch at the same diner every Tuesday. He had never married and had no children, and the people who knew him assumed he was simply modest. He was not modest. Raymond left Darnell $800,000 in a private estate account, along with a handwritten letter that said 3 things: that he loved him like a son, that he had watched him carefully for years and trusted his character completely, and that the money was to be kept separate from everything and everyone until Darnell knew exactly what he wanted to do with it. Keep it separate. Keep it quiet. Darnell sat in the parking lot of the funeral home for 45 minutes after the reading. He did not tell Keisha. He did not tell anyone. 6 weeks later, he called Jerome Whitfield. Jerome had been his college roommate at Clark Atlanta. Sharp, organized, the kind of man who read contracts the way other people read menus, carefully and without rushing. Jerome had been trying to launch a private lending operation for 2 years but was short on capital and long on patience. Darnell brought the $800,000. Jerome brought everything else. Crossbridge Financial was incorporated in April of 2020, with Jerome as the public-facing chief executive and Darnell as a silent equity partner holding 100% of the founding shares. Jerome ran the operation. Darnell asked questions by phone when he had them and received quarterly statements in cream-colored envelopes that he kept in the lockbox his uncle had also left him. The arrangement suited both men perfectly. Jerome got to build something. Darnell got to watch something grow in the dark, the way his uncle had always done. Crossbridge grew faster than either of them anticipated. By the end of 2021, the firm had crossed $22 million in active loan origination. Jerome called Darnell from his office in Buckhead, barely containing himself. Darnell was in the school parking lot eating a sandwich, and he said that was good news, and he meant it. Meanwhile, at home, something was shifting. Keisha had started spending more time with a different crowd at Greater Harvest. Women whose husbands had titles and offices and cars that were never more than 2 years old. She came home from their gatherings quieter than usual, and the quiet had a texture to it that Darnell recognized but could not name. It was the quiet of a woman taking inventory. A man named Terence Okafor had appeared at the hospital around this time, a personal injury attorney disputing a billing arrangement on behalf of a client. Keisha handled the account. They exchanged cards. She mentioned him once, briefly, as a contact. Darnell did not think much of it. He should have paid closer attention to the way she said the name. By the spring of 2022, Keisha was getting dressed for things Darnell was not invited to. Work events, she said, networking. She was careful about the details, not secretive exactly, but precise in the way of someone who has rehearsed the explanation. Darnell would sit on the edge of the bed and watch her check her earrings in the mirror, and she would leave without kissing him goodbye, and the apartment would go quiet in a way that felt less like peace and more like an answer to a question he had not yet asked out loud. The cruelty, though, the real cruelty, was still ahead, and it would not stay private for long. The envelope sat on Darnell's kitchen counter for 4 days. He was not avoiding it exactly. He told himself he was giving himself time. He went to work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, mopped the same hallways, ate lunch in the same break room, drove home the same way. And the envelope was always there when he walked in, cream-coloured and still, sitting on the counter like it had patience to spare. Thursday morning he picked it up. He made himself a cup of coffee first. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same chair he always sat in, the one facing the window, and he opened it. The first document was a quarterly dividend statement from Crossbridge Financial, dated October 1st, 2022. The amount was $214,000. The recipient was listed as Darnell A. Cross, Silent Equity Partner, 100% founding shares. He set it down and looked out the window for a moment. The second document was a portfolio performance summary. 12 pages, dense with figures and projections. He did not read every line. He read enough. Crossbridge Financial had crossed $47 million in active loan origination. The firm had funded 231 cases in the current fiscal year alone. Its net revenue position had grown 31% since the previous quarter. Jerome had been busy. Darnell finished his coffee. Then he called Jerome. Jerome Whitfield picked up on the second ring, the way he always did, and before Darnell could say anything, Jerome said it was good to hear from him, and that he had been meaning to call, and that Crossbridge was doing things neither of them had fully anticipated when they started this whole operation in a conference room above a dry cleaner on Cascade Road 2 years ago. Darnell let him talk. Then he said he had opened the quarterly statement. Jerome went quiet for exactly 1 beat. Then he said yes, that was a strong quarter. Darnell asked Jerome to pull up the current client roster while they were on the phone. Jerome said sure, and Darnell heard the clicking of keys. Jerome started reading through the top accounts. A regional hospital network, a downtown firm specializing in workers' compensation, 2 solo practitioners running high-volume caseloads. Then Jerome said the name, Okafor and Associates, 4th largest active client. $1.3 million in litigation funding across 11 open cases. The firm had been a Crossbridge client for 14 months. Darnell did not respond immediately. Jerome, not yet understanding the weight of what he had just said, added that Okafor was a reliable account. Payments on time, clean documentation, no disputes. He said it like it was good news. It was not good news. It was something else entirely. Darnell asked Jerome to say the firm's name one more time. Jerome did. Darnell asked him to confirm the principal attorney of record. Jerome said Terence Okafor, personal injury, offices on Peachtree Street in Buckhead. The silence that followed lasted longer than Jerome was comfortable with, because Darnell was doing the arithmetic. quietly, carefully, the way his Uncle Raymond had taught him to do everything, without rushing, without showing his hand, without letting the size of the number disturb his face. Terence Okafor's Buckhead office, funded by Crossbridge, Terence Okafor's caseload, sustained by Crossbridge Capital. The white Mercedes sitting at the curb outside Darnell's own house on a Thursday evening in October, made possible in part by money that traced back to an $800,000 inheritance that a quiet man from Macon had left to his nephew with one instruction: keep it separate. Keisha had walked out of her marriage and into a life that her husband had been financing without either of them knowing it. The irony of it was so complete, so geometrically perfect, that it almost didn't feel real. It felt like something that happened in stories, not in kitchens in West End. Jerome asked if everything was all right. Darnell said yes. He said he was just thinking. He asked Jerome how Crossbridge's standard funding agreements were structured, specifically whether there was a mechanism to call active positions without cause. Jerome said yes. Section 4.2 of every standard agreement gave Crossbridge the right to initiate a portfolio rebalancing notice with 90 days lead time, no explanation required, no penalty. Darnell said he understood. Jerome asked what he was thinking. He said it carefully, the way a man asks when he already suspects the answer is going to change the shape of something. Darnell told him he wasn't thinking anything yet. He said he would be in touch. He thanked Jerome for his time and told him the quarter looked strong and that he was proud of what they had built. He hung up. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice and went quiet. A car rolled slowly down Oglethorpe Avenue. The refrigerator hummed the same way it always had. Then Darnell reached into the envelope one more time, unfolded the portfolio summary to its first page, and smoothed it flat against the table with the palm of his hand. He looked at the figure, $47 million. And then he looked at Terence Okafor's name in the client list Jerome had read aloud, and something in him settled into a stillness that was different from patience. It was precision. He folded the dividend statement once, cleanly, and slid it into the breast pocket of his jacket. Then he picked up his phone and called Jerome back. Jerome answered on the first ring. This time, Darnell said, "Pull everything on Okafor, all of it." He didn't move immediately after that. He moved correctly. Jerome had the full Okafor file ready by the following Wednesday. Darnell drove to the Crossbridge offices on a grey November morning and sat down in Jerome's conference room for the first time since the firm had moved to its current space. The office was clean and serious. Glass and dark wood, a long table, framed certificates on the wall that Darnell had never seen before because he had never been in the room to see them. Jerome had built something real here. Darnell looked around and felt the quiet weight of that. Jerome set the file on the table between them. 43 pages. Every active Okafor case, every disbursement, every contractual term, every projected return. Darnell went through it slowly while Jerome sat across from him and said nothing, which was one of the things Darnell had always respected about the man. The three largest cases were a wrongful termination claim projected at $800,000, a premises liability suit projected at $740,000, and a multi-vehicle accident case projected at $560,000. Combined projected value, $2.1 million. All three were currently funded by Crossbridge Capital. All three were mid-litigation, meaning Terence Okafor needed continued disbursements to keep the cases alive. Without that funding, he would have to settle fast, settle low or walk away. He could not do any of those things without bleeding. Jerome had also arranged a meeting with Claudette Odom, Crossbridge's outside counsel. Claudette arrived at 11 o'clock in a charcoal blazer with a leather portfolio under her arm and the calm, unbothered energy of a woman who had seen every version of this situation and found none of them surprising. She shook Darnell's hand, sat down, opened her portfolio, and got directly to the point. She said that under Section 4.2 of Crossbridge's Standard Litigation Funding Agreement, the same agreement Okafor and Associates had signed 14 months prior, Crossbridge retained the unilateral right to issue a portfolio rebalancing notice at any time, requiring the full recall of active funding positions within 90 days, no cause required, no explanation owed. It was a standard clause present in every agreement the firm had ever executed, and Okafor's attorneys had signed it without objection because it was standard. Darnell asked if there was any exposure, any way for Okafor to push back legally. Claudette said no. She said it the way people say things they are completely certain of, being without emphasis, without drama, just the flat weight of a fact. The contract was clean, the clause was enforceable, Crossbridge's position was unassailable. Darnell nodded slowly. He asked what the notice would look like. Claudette slid a single page across the table, one paragraph, formal letterhead, precise language informing Okafor and Associates that Crossbridge Financial was initiating a portfolio rebalancing effective immediately, with full recall of all active funding positions to be completed within 90 calendar days per the terms of their executed agreement. No names, no hostility, no indication of anything personal. Just business, clean and cold as January. Darnell read it twice. Then he looked up and said there was one more instruction. If Okafor's firm contacted Crossbridge requesting a meeting with the decision-maker, and he believed they would, Jerome was to accept the meeting and list Darnell Cross as the primary attendee by name. Jerome looked at him. He said, "Are you sure?" Darnell said yes. Jerome wrote it down. After Claudette left, Darnell sat in the conference room alone for a few minutes, while Jerome took a call down the hall. He looked at the one-paragraph notice sitting on the table in front of him. He thought about the night Keisha left. He thought about the envelope she had pressed into his chest with contempt, so casual it barely registered on her face. He thought about Tamara standing at the counter with her arms folded, the silent co-signer of his humiliation. He thought about that white Mercedes idling at the curb and the silhouette behind the glass who had never once considered looking at who he was taking something from. He did not feel anger, exactly. What he felt was something colder and more useful than anger. He felt ready. That afternoon he drove to First National Community Bank on Ralph David Abernathy Boulevard and sat down with a personal accounts officer. He presented the dividend statement, the Crossbridge partnership documentation his uncle's estate attorney had prepared, and the account information Raymond Cross had left him in a sealed envelope inside the lockbox, an account Raymond had opened in Darnell's name in 2017 and kept funded at a base of $50,000, exactly as instructed. Darnell deposited the $214,000 dividend into the Raymond Cross personal account and watched the balance settle into a number that would have made Keisha's mother Diane go completely quiet at her own dinner table. He did not tell anyone. He drove home. He made dinner. He sat by the window and watched Oglethorpe Avenue go dark the way it always did in November, the streetlights coming on one by one in the early evening. The next morning he called Jerome and told him to send the notice. Jerome sent it on a Tuesday. One paragraph, Crossbridge financial letterhead, a fax confirmation, and a certified mail receipt, both time-stamped at 9:17 in the morning. No drama, no raised voices, no warning of any kind that the ground beneath Terence Okafor's entire operation had just shifted permanently. By Friday, Terence Okafor's office was in crisis. The notice arrived at Okafor and Associates on a Tuesday morning at 9:17. Terence read it standing at his desk, one paragraph, standard letterhead, professional language that said absolutely nothing threatening and meant something devastating. He read it twice, set it down, and told his junior associate to look into it. He had a deposition at 11. He was not concerned. That was his first mistake. By Thursday, the junior associate had read the full contract. He brought the file to Terence with the relevant clause flagged in yellow. Section 4.2, 90 days, no cause required. Terence read it and called Crossbridge Financial directly. The receptionist was polite. She said someone would be in touch. Nobody called back that day. The weekend passed. Terence made calls. He had a contact at a litigation funding firm in Midtown. They passed. He had a relationship with a private equity group that occasionally backed legal operations. They needed 60 days to evaluate, which was 60 days he did not have cleanly. A third lender he approached through a referral from a colleague took his pitch meeting on a Wednesday afternoon and ghosted him entirely by Friday morning. No email, no call, nothing. 3 weeks in, the capital search was dead. Terence called an all-hands with his 2 junior partners on the first Monday of December. Marcus Ellison had been with the firm 4 years. Diane Foote had been there 3. Both of them had built their livelihoods around Okafor and Associates, and both of them sat across that conference table with the kind of careful, quiet expressions that people wear when they already know the answer and are waiting for someone to say it out loud. Terence explained the situation. He used careful language. He said it was a temporary disruption in their funding relationship. He said he was managing it. Marcus asked him to pull up the firm's operating account balance. Terence did not pull it up. That meeting lasted 40 minutes and ended without resolution, and with 2 junior partners who left the building and did not come back that afternoon. By the end of the week, the 3 largest cases in the Okafor portfolio were in emergency settlement talks. The wrongful termination case, projected at $800,000, settled for $112,000. The premises liabilities suit settled for $94,000. The multi-vehicle accident case, the one Terence had been most confident about, the one he had told Keisha over dinner would set them up for the year, settled for $68,000. $2.1 million in projected awards became $274,000 in actual recovery. Word moved through Atlanta's legal community the way word always moves, not loudly, not officially, just through a series of lunches and phone calls and hallway conversations at the Fulton County Courthouse, where someone mentioned the Okafor situation to someone else who mentioned it to someone else. Nobody said anything publicly. Nobody needed to. In a city where reputation was currency, the silence was loud enough. The Buckhead condo lease came up for renewal in December. The landlord required current proof of income and a renewed financial statement. Terence submitted what he had. The landlord declined to renew. Terence moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Decatur in the 3rd week of December. He drove the white Mercedes to the new address and parked it on the street because there was no covered garage. Keisha was with him for the move. She helped carry boxes. She did not say much. But that evening, sitting in an apartment that was a fraction of what she had left Darnell's house for, she started asking questions. Whose name was on the Buckhead lease? Whether her name was on any of Terence's accounts? What exactly was happening with the firm? Terence answered each question the way a man answers when the answers are bad, with deflection, then irritation, then a version of the truth that was technically accurate and emotionally evasive. Her name was on nothing. It had never been on anything. She called Tamara that night from the bathroom, with the door closed and the water running. Tamara called their mother Diane the next morning over coffee. Diane told the prayer circle at Greater Harvest Baptist that Wednesday evening, framing it as a request for intercession on behalf of her daughter, who was going through a difficult season. By Sunday service, every woman in that congregation who had smiled and nodded when Keisha made her announcement knew exactly what kind of season it was. Darnell heard none of this directly. He was going to work, coming home, cooking dinner, sitting by the window. He did not ask questions and he did not seek out information. He simply waited, the way his Uncle Raymond had taught him to wait. Without anxiety, without performance, with the settled confidence of a man who had already made his move and understood that the board was now doing exactly what it was supposed to do. In the third week of December, Jerome called. Terence Okafor's firm had contacted Crossbridge requesting an emergency meeting with the decision-maker. They wanted to negotiate reinstatement of funding. They were prepared to offer revised terms. Jerome had accepted the meeting. He had listed Darnell Cross as the primary attendee. That evening, Terence received the meeting confirmation by email. He read the attendee list. The name Darnell Cross appeared at the top, listed as Founding Equity Partner, Crossbridge Financial. He stared at it for a long moment. The name meant nothing to him. It would mean everything in 48 hours. Darnell arrived at the Crossbridge offices 12 minutes early. He wore the same dark jacket he wore to Raymond's funeral, not as a statement, just because it fit well and it was clean and it was his. He took the elevator to the 4th floor, nodded to the receptionist, and walked into the conference room where Jerome was already seated at the head of the table with 2 folders in front of him and the careful expression of a man who understood the weight of what was about to happen. Terence Okafor was already there too. He was dressed for business. Sharp suit, good watch, the posture of a man who had spent years walking into rooms and owning them. He had brought a junior associate with him, a young woman with a legal pad who sat 2 seats down and did not make eye contact with anyone. Terence himself looked tired beneath the performance of confidence. The kind of tired that comes from 2 months of losing. He did not look at Darnell when Darnell walked in. Jerome stood. He said he wanted to formally introduce the parties. He said, "This is Darnell Cross, founding equity partner of Crossbridge Financial and the firm's sole silent shareholder since inception." Terence looked up. The name had been on the meeting confirmation. He had read it. It had meant nothing to him then. But now there was a face attached to it, and something in Terence's expression shifted. Not all at once, but in stages, like a building settling. The name, the face, the West End address on the partnership documentation. Jerome slid across the table, and then slowly, like a door opening onto a room he had not known existed, the connection. Darnell sat down. He folded his hands on the table. He did not speak. The silence lasted 11 seconds. Darnell counted them internally, the way his Uncle Raymond had once told him to count before making any decision that could not be unmade. 11 seconds of Terence Okafor sitting across a conference table from the man whose wife he had taken, finally understanding, for the first time, exactly where his funding had come from. Then Darnell spoke. He did not raise his voice. He did not lean forward. He spoke the way a man speaks when he has already won and simply needs to say the words out loud so that everyone in the room understands the final score. He told Terence about his Uncle Raymond. He told him about the $800,000 and the instruction to keep it separate, and the founding of Crossbridge Financial in April of 2020, while Darnell was still mopping floors at Parkside Elementary, and Keisha was still coming home for dinner. He told him about the quarterly statements that arrived in cream-colored envelopes that his wife had never asked about. He told him about Section 4.2 of the standard funding agreement that Terence's own attorneys had reviewed and signed without objection 14 months prior. He told him that the portfolio rebalancing notice had not been an accident or a coincidence or a routine business decision. Terence's jaw tightened. He said there had to be something they could work out. He said he was prepared to offer revised terms. He said his firm had been a reliable client, and that Crossbridge's own records would confirm that every disbursement had been repaid on schedule. Darnell let him finish. Then he closed his folder. He picked it up. He pushed his chair back from the table and stood, and the room went very quiet in the way rooms do when something final is happening. He looked at Terence directly and said, "You sat outside my house in a white Mercedes with the engine running, while my wife told me I was nothing. You never once looked at who you were taking something from. It's always been possible for this to end this way. You just never looked at who was in the room." He left the folder on the table. He walked out. Jerome stayed behind to handle the formal close of the meeting. Darnell took the elevator down alone, walked through the lobby and drove back to West End in the same quiet he had always carried. Steady, unhurried, complete. 2 weeks passed. On a Saturday morning in January, there was a knock at Darnell's front door. He was in the kitchen. He was not expecting anyone. He opened the door, and Keisha was standing on the porch. She had done her hair. She was wearing the camel coat she always wore when she wanted to make a good impression. The one she'd had for 4 years, the one she'd worn to the church Christmas concert the year before everything fell apart. She asked if they could talk. Her voice was careful and small in a way Darnell had never heard from her before. He stepped aside and let her in. She sat down at the kitchen table. The same chair. The same table where she had pressed an envelope into his chest and called him nothing. She sat there and she told him she had made a mistake. She told him Terence was not the man she thought he was. She told him she had been staying with Tamara and that her account was overdrawn, that her card had been declined at a gas station on Cascade Road, 3 miles from this house, and that she had driven here because she had nowhere else to go and nothing else to try. She needed $1, just enough to clear the hold, just one. She said it quietly. She could not meet his eyes. Darnell listened to every word. He did not interrupt her. He did not shift in his chair, or check his phone, or give her any signal at all about what he was thinking. He simply let her finish the way you let something run its full course before you decide what to do with it. Then he opened the kitchen drawer. He reached past the take-out menus and the rubber bands and the spare keys, and he pulled out a cream-colored envelope. He set it on the table between them. It was the original Crossbridge financial envelope, the one she had grabbed from the mail pile, pressed hard against his chest, and called junk from a fake company on the night she left. He watched her look at it. He watched recognition move across her face like weather. He said, "You held that envelope and told me I was nothing. What you didn't know was that envelope was a $214,000 dividend check from a company that was funding everything he had. The moment I stopped signing, he stopped standing. And now you're sitting in my kitchen asking me for $1." He slid the envelope back into the drawer. He stood. He walked to the front door. He opened it. Keisha sat at the kitchen table for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Then she stood. She picked up her purse. She walked past him through the door without a word, down the front steps and across the same driveway where Darnell had once sat alone in his truck, in the dark, watching taillights disappear. She did not look back. He closed the door. Then he got to work. Getting to work for Darnell Cross looked nothing like what the people in his former life would have expected. He did not buy a new car. He did not move out of the house on Oglethorpe Avenue. He did not throw a party or post anything or make any kind of announcement to anyone. What he did was call Jerome on a Monday morning in February and tell him he was ready to come in. Not as a voice on the phone, not as a name on a quarterly statement, but as a presence at the table. Jerome had been asking for 2 years. Darnell was finally saying yes. He started going into the Crossbridge offices 3 days a week. He sat in on portfolio reviews. He asked questions. He read contracts with the same unhurried attention he had given everything else in his life, and the analysts on Jerome's team, who had known him only as a name in the founding documents, quickly understood that the silent partner was not silent because he had nothing to say. He had simply been waiting for the right time to say it. By March, Jerome had given him the formal title of Senior Equity Advisor. Darnell accepted it without ceremony. He updated nothing publicly. He told his mother, Miss Gloria, over Sunday dinner, pot roast, rice, cornbread, the way she had always made it. And she listened and nodded and said Raymond would have been pleased. And then she asked him if he wanted more cornbread, and that was that. The Raymond Cross Fund was his idea. He brought it to Greater Harvest Baptist in April, through Pastor Ellaby, who had known Raymond Cross and who listened to the proposal with his hands folded and his eyes closed, and then said yes before Darnell had finished the last sentence. The fund offered matched savings grants of $5,000 each to West End residents working toward financial independence, an emergency fund, a business deposit, a first step toward ownership of something that was theirs. The first cohort of 12 recipients was announced on a Sunday morning in May, and Darnell sat in the 3rd row next to his mother and watched 12 people walk to the front of that sanctuary and receive something that Raymond Cross had spent a lifetime believing ordinary people deserved. He did not put his name on the banner. The banner said Raymond Cross Fund. That was enough. Terence Okafor's name appeared in a brief item in the Atlanta Business Chronicle in June. His former junior partners, Marcus Ellison and Diane Foote, had filed a bar complaint related to the mismanagement of client settlement funds during the period following Crossbridge's portfolio rebalancing notice. The complaint was sustained. Terence surrendered his law license in August without a public statement. By September, he had relocated to Macon. The white Mercedes was gone. Nobody in Atlanta mentioned his name out loud very often, but nobody had forgotten it either. Keisha went back to Grady Health in the spring, not to her old position, which had been filled, but to a junior billing role 2 grades below where she had been when she left. She rode the same bus routes she had ridden before Terence. She wore sensible shoes now instead of the heels she used to favor on days she wanted to feel like a different version of herself. She attended Greater Harvest every Sunday. She sat 3 pews behind Darnell's mother, Miss Gloria, who never acknowledged her directly and never ignored her rudely, just nodded the way church people nod when they know everything and have decided that God will handle the rest. Keisha did not speak to Darnell. Darnell did not speak to Keisha. The distance between 3 pews was not large in feet. In every other measurement it was enormous. Diane Pruitt stopped hosting family dinners on Cascade Road sometime in the late spring. The prayer circle had long memories, and the women who had once sat around Diane's table praising Keisha's courage for leaving and endorsing her judgment in choosing Terence now found reasons to be busy on the evenings when Diane's invitations came. It was nothing official. Nobody said a word directly. That was not how those things worked. They simply found other places to be. 14 months after Keisha walked out of his kitchen for the last time, Darnell attended Crossbridge Financial's 4th anniversary dinner at a private event space in Midtown. Jerome had rented the entire top floor. There were 60 people in the room. Partners, clients, advisors, staff. Darnell sat at a round table near the window, with a view of the city he had lived in his whole life and never quite seen from this angle before. The woman seated next to him introduced herself as Simone Garrett. She was a certified public accountant from Lithonia, precise in the way of people who work with numbers and have learned to value accuracy over performance. She had a quiet sense of humor and a way of listening that made you feel like your words mattered before you had finished saying them. Over the salad course, she asked him if he enjoyed the work. Over the main course, she asked him about Raymond Cross, whose name she had seen on a program from a Greater Harvest community event. Over dessert, she asked him what he did for a living. He thought about how to answer. He thought about the envelope, about the kitchen, about 9 years of mopping floors in the dark and $47 million moving quietly through a firm with his name in the founding documents and a woman calling him nothing on her way out the door. Then he smiled, and he said, "I'm still figuring that out." Simone Garrett smiled back. Outside the window, Atlanta stretched out in every direction, lit up and indifferent and beautiful. And for the first time in longer than he could precisely remember, Darnell Cross felt completely at ease inside his own life. Some people look at a man and see a ceiling. They calculate his limits before he has spoken a word. They measure his worth by his title, his address, his car, the way he does or does not move through a room. They make their decisions based on what they can see, and they are so certain of what they see that it never occurs to them to look at what is underneath. They never consider that what they're calling a ceiling might actually be a floor, and that everything they're standing on belongs to him. Now, if you were sitting in Darnell's place that night Keisha walked in, what would you have done? Would you have listened the way he listened, or would you have said something entirely different? Drop your answer in the comments. We want to know what you think. If this story moved you, if it kept you listening all the way to the end, do one thing before you go. Hit that like button. It costs you nothing and it means everything for this channel. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is the time. There is another story coming that you are not going to want to miss. We will see you in the next one.